Last week, we started looking at what the law was. We looked at 10 Commandments. And like I said, this week we're going to look at what sin is. This thing, sin. What is it? The textbook definition is missing the mark. But misunderstanding of sin causes so many problems and so many issues within the Christian church. Excuse me 1 second. Make sure my timer is on so I don't go over. Sin is, yes, missing the mark. Yes, sin is doing what God says don't do. Sin is acting outside the perimeters that God has given us. All that's true. But there is something deeper about sin that we must understand. If we don't understand what sin is in its actuality and how it relates to the law, what happens is we have the danger of being in one of two groups. Either we can end up in legalism, which is the rules are the rules, and without understanding the spirit of those rules, you have this slavish obedience to the rules for the sake of the rules. That's not good in God's eyes. As a matter of fact, legalist people were the they're the people that angered Jesus the most, the Pharisees. They were the most legalist. They kept the law even better than anybody else could ever. But Jesus was opposed to them because they were doing things not understanding why they were doing it. They were elevating the law even higher than God. So if we don't understand what sin is, we are in the danger of being in that group. Or the opposite of it is antinomianism, which is anti-rule, anti-God, anti-law people. You can feel like you are, I am under grace. God has forgiven my sins. Yes, He did. But this is not a license to live against what the rules are. You see, improper understanding of what sin is and how it relates to law has the danger of us being within one of these two rules. So, what is the proper understanding of sin? In order to understand that, like we did, we must look at the law, which is what? The 10 Commandments and the other ones that God has given. Simply put, the law is reflection of who God is. If you don't remember anything from today, please remember this point. Law is a reflection of who God is. Law is an insight, an extension of God to His creation, of His nature. When we look at the law, we see God's nature. When we look at the law, we see God's characteristics and what He thinks of us, what's important for Him, what's valuable for Him. Where do we stand in relation to Him? How do we stand in relation to others? Now, when we look at the 10 Commandments, like we did last week, we see that there are two groups. First group talks about our relationship to God. We might call it a vertical connection from us to God. What does it say? Again, I'm in Exodus 20, verse 2. You will not have any other gods before me. You will not make yourself idols. You will not use God's name in vain. And you will keep the Sabbath day. That's actually, as for Jesus, that's for men, not for God. So this is a vertical relationship. And the rest is a horizontal relationship. What does that mean? It is our relationship between one another. One is from us to God, vertical. The other one is horizontal, one another. So the law talks about what? Let's see. Honor your father and mother. You will not murder. You will not commit adultery. You will not steal. You will not lie. You will not covet. This is all relationship between one another. Now, what's the part we must understand? When we look at these rules towards God and towards one another, if we only see limitation on what we can do, we miss the point. Are you with me? If we only see what we can't do here, we miss the point. When we say law is the reflection of God's nature, I want us to understand this. It's not only what we can't do. This is also God's love towards us, in which He's protecting us. For instance, if we were to read verse 12, honor your father and your mother, right? That's the rule. Why is that there? Think about it. Because as the mom and the dad gets older, they are financially less relevant, needed, physically less needed, and they tend to kind of be forgotten. So what's God doing by putting this law? He's protecting the moms and the dads from being irrelevant, being put out to pasture. Do you see His love for the moms and the dads? Let's go to the second one. You will not murder. This is God protecting you from somebody else coming and murdering you. You see His attributes. These are called God's moral attributes. This is the reflection we're talking about. It's not only about you not murdering, it's about you being murdered. What's the next one? You will not commit adultery. This is God protecting you or your wife or your husband from committing adultery, or somebody else committing adultery with your wife or with your husband. And it continues this way. You will not bear false witness. This is not only that we don't lie, this is God preventing somebody else from lying to you. You will not covet, be jealous, desire with envy your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's servant, and donkey, ox, and car, and whatever. This is God protecting you from those kinds of attitudes. So, if we take a step back and look at these rules that He's given us, we do see sin is not checking the box. I did this, I didn't do this, I didn't do this, I'm good. No. Sin is, in light of what we just read, is coming against the very nature of God. You could even say sin is rebelling against God. Rebelling against His nature, not accepting His nature. You see, if you only look at it as though it's a bunch of rules, You might say, it's archaic, this is 2000, whatever we are in, 21 now. These things don't apply. Do you want to be not murdered? Do you want to be not lied to? Do you want your husband or your wife to be faithful to you? Do you want to be not stolen from? It applies to every single one, even today and forever. As long as there is people, it applies to us. So, we said proper understanding of sin is what? Coming against the nature of God. I'm just going to give you 4 points here of what kinds of sin there are. There is the sin of presumption. Sin of presumption is the worst kind of sin. Knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, but with an attitude of rebellion, not doing it, or doing something that you're supposed to not do. With a attitude of being anti-God, against rebellion. Willfully, stubbornly, rebelliously. That's the sin of presumption. That's the worst kind of sin, and that actually gets the worst punishment, consequences. Second is the sin of ignorance. You don't know you're sinning. So the punishment, consequence for that is not as great, but yet you're still responsible because you sinned, even though you didn't know. Like example I gave you, you didn't know it was 55 miles an hour. You got pulled over, got a ticket. It was 55. You didn't know, but you still have to pay for the ticket. Then there is the sin of commission. Doing the wrong thing, but not premeditated, not rebellious. You were just going through your daily life and something happened, you just chose to do the wrong thing, but not with a rebellious attitude. That is also wrong. It also has punishment. And there is the lastly, sin of omission, which is intentionally not doing the right thing. You know what you're supposed to do, but you intentionally don't do it. That is also a sin. Now, the verse I can give you for that is James 4:17, which reads, "Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him that is sin." So sin can be positive, active, sin can be passive, but it's all about our understanding of who we are, who God is, and how we relate to one another. As my time is running out, I'd like to read to you 20 points, it'll go fast, that we learn from the scriptures about sin, truth about sin. 1, little sin leads to more sin. For the sake of time, I'm not going to give you the scripture quotations, but if you like, I have them, I'll give it to you. Sin invites the discipline of God. There is always consequence for sin, whether you're a believer or unbeliever. If we sin, we are going to pay for it. Now, the discipline comes after we sin, and it always has a price, and it's always hurtful, painful. Time spent in sin is forever wasted. My sin never pleases, but always grieves God who loves me. My sin places a greater burden on my spiritual leaders. In time, sin always brings heaviness to my heart and to my life. Others, including my family, suffer the consequences of my sin. My sin makes enemies of God rejoice. Sin deceives me into believing I have gained, when in reality I have lost. Sin makes you think that you got away with it, or you got something extra, or you're getting your way. In reality, you will find out sooner or later that you had actually lost. Sin may keep me from qualifying for spiritual leadership. The supposed benefit of my sin never outweigh the consequences of disobedience. Repenting of sin is painful, is a painful process. My sin may influence others to sin. You affect others. My sin may keep others from knowing Christ. Sin makes light of the cross upon which Christ died for the very purpose of taking my sins away. It is impossible to sin and follow the Spirit at the same time. If there is sin in your life, you're not walking with God. If there is sin in your life, God is not hearing your prayers. It's impossible to be both at the same time. Others more earnest than I have been destroyed by such sins. God chooses not to hear the prayers of those who cherish their sin. This is such an important point that it's repeated in Psalm 66, Psalm 15, Psalm 29, Psalm 21, Psalm 28, Isaiah 1, John 9, and James 4. My unwillingness to reject this sin now grants it authority over me greater than I understand. I wish I had time to open this one up. My unwillingness to reject this sin opens me up for evil forces to come in me and make me miserable, make others miserable through me. When we are willingly sinning, opening ourselves up to sin, beloved, please remember this. You are giving authority to your own enemy to come to mess with you, to bring you down. And the 20th thing that we learn from scriptures about sin is, I promise God He will be the Lord of my life, not sin and not the enemy. And I want to close this with this stanza. Sin will take you farther than you ever thought you would stray. Sin will leave you so lost, you think you never find your way. Sin will keep you longer than you ever thought you would stay. Sin will cost you more, much more than you ever thought you would pay. God bless you. Let's